Hi, I'm Chuck Thompson, and we're back to continue our class on the book of Revelation. I'm sorry I had to miss the last 3 weeks, but I've had some illness, spent a little time in the hospital. But I'm back out now, not 100%, but I'm ready to rock. And today we're going to talk about the rapture. And that's chapter 4 in the book of Revelation, where the rapture happens. Chapter 5 is going to talk about what's going on in heaven or on earth during this time. Chapter 4 talks about what's happening in heaven and the rapture. Chapter 6, we introduce the Antichrist. But as we closed the last time, we were talking about the 7,000 year theory of mankind. And I had mentioned I'm not crazy about this because it kind of wants to predict when the rapture or the coming of Christ is going to happen. And it's one of the oldest theories, coming about right about the time of Pentecost. And it says that the creation happened 3,740 years before that, according to the Jewish calendar. So then they found out that there was a 240-year error in that calendar, modern day scholars say. So we're talking about 4,000 years before Pentecost is when the creation happened. And it talks also about how a year in our terms equates to 1,000 years in God's terms. Peter says that, teaches that one day with the Lord is as if 1,000 years. Hebrews 4:11 presents the millennium as a day of rest. The theory states that God will deal with mankind for 6 of his days, or 6,000 years. So we're past 4,000 years when the Pentecost happens. 2,000 years later, here we are, and that's 6,000 years. And that's saying that it's time for the Lord to come. Now, I don't like it because it predicts that. But Jesus said there's no way to know when this is going to happen. Only the Father will know. But we can predict the season. Now, I like that because there's a lot to show that the season is near. So what I'm going to say is before the millennium can happen, that's when Jesus rules on earth for 1,000 years. Before that can happen, there are 2 things that have to happen. One is the rapture, and the second one is the tribulation. We're going to talk about the rapture today. Remember that the book of Revelation is very sequenced. The Antichrist cannot be revealed until the church is already raptured. So we couldn't talk about the Antichrist up until now, and we still can't yet. The rapture happens in chapter 4 and the tribulation in chapter 6. We'll be talking about the rapture today. There's no mention of how much time will pass between the rapture and the tribulation. Some believe it will happen right away. Others think there might be years that goes by. The only thing that we know for sure, there has to be time for the Antichrist to have risen in Europe and take over the world government. He will also need to make a covenant to protest Israel. Remember, I said that there are things that are happening today that can predict the season. Some of these things that I just said are happening today in Europe. And again, there are 3 theories about when the rapture will happen. One is that it will happen pre-tribulation. The other one will happen during the tribulation. And the other one is that it will happen after the tribulation. Most scholars, and myself included, I'm not a scholar, but I also agree that the rapture will happen before the tribulation because that's the way it's sequenced in the Bible. I'll give you 2 reasons now. That the author of my book, my textbook, Damon Duct, gives you 10 reasons why the rapture will happen before the tribulation. I'm just going to give you 2 right now. One is that the Bible never says that the church will go through the tribulation. In fact, when you read in the Bible, the first 3 chapters, the church is mentioned 22 times. When we get to chapter 4, where the rapture happens, the church is no longer mentioned all the way through 4 through chapter 19. The church is just not there. And then in chapter 20 through 22, these are things to come. then the church is back. Again, the tribulation is going to last. The tribulation is going to last for 7 years, but we do not know how long the rapture will be after the rapture before it will happen. We may be in heaven for years before the tribulation begins. And I mentioned about the 7,000 year theory. Okay, so let's go right to Revelation chapter 4, verse 1. After these things I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven. And the first voice which I heard was like a trumpet speaking with me, saying, Come up here, and I will show you things that have to take place after this. So the first part of it, Jesus says, after these things. What's he talking about after these things? The Bible is divided into 3 different parts. The first part is things that have happened, history. That is chapters 1 through 3, history. By this time, it's all in the future, but by the time we get to the rapture, the church age is history. The church age is what we're living in now. That's another reason to believe that the rapture has already happened, because the church age will be history, chapters 1 through 3. Chapters 4 and 5 indicate things that are happening right now. Okay, so that's when the rapture is actually going to happen. John's ascending into heaven is symbolic of the rapture, and it's a voice that sounded like a trumpet. So it's for this reason that many Bible scholars consider this and other reasons as John representing the entire church. Others ascended in this way as in addition. A lot of people think that the rapture is the first time that people were taken into heaven this way. It's not true. There are quite a few. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 5. It was by faith that Enoch was taken up into heaven without dying. Enoch was the first one. He just disappeared because God took him before it happened, and he was known as a man who pleased God. This was Enoch before the flood ever happened. Then we go to 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 11. This was Elijah between the flood and the cross. As they were walking along and talking, suddenly a chariot of fire appeared, drawn by horses of fire. It drove between 2 men, separating them, and Elijah was carried off by a whirlwind into heaven. So Elijah was the second one. In Acts chapter 1, verse 9, this was Jesus. So after saying this, he was taken up into a cloud while they were watching, and they could no longer see him. The eunuch went about his business rejoicing, and in the meantime Philip found himself further to the north, as in the town of Azotus. He preached the good news there and in every town along the way to Caesarea. So Philip also was taken up. Corinthians, Paul was taken up. Paul don't know if he was out of his body or if his entire body went, but he was taken. The 2 witnesses during the tribulation, and everybody watched them go up into the clouds. So the rapture is not a new idea when we get to chapter 4. It happened all the way back years ago, thousands of years. The 2 witnesses in Revelation are one of my favorite ones. There are those who say the rapture will not happen, as it is not even mentioned in the Bible, and it's not mentioned in the Bible. But if you go back to the original writing, there's a Latin translation that says rapere, which means to be plucked up. There is no word in the Christian or in the English language that matches this word, and so Christians take it to mean the rapture. That's where we get the rapture from, even though it's not mentioned in the Bible. As Jesus utters the word must, it's very important. It means the Old Testament prophecies and predictions of Jesus have to be fulfilled before the rapture. Remember, the Bible is very sequenced. Chapter 4, verse 2. Immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne set in heaven, and one sat on the throne. In the Spirit means his spirit was actually left his body. His body could not enter heaven yet, since he had not been glorified. But because of the Holy of Jesus, he was able to be brought up in his spirit. In verse 3, he who sat there was like a jasper. This is after John's taken up. He who sat there was like a jasper and sardius stone in appearance, and there was a rainbow around the throne, in appearance like an emerald. Now that's verse 3. When John arrived, Jesus was on the throne. Jasper and sardius are the first and last stones on the breastplate of the high priest. Jesus is our high priest for eternity. Jasper, the white shining light, is similar to a diamond, and it represents the holiness of Jesus. Sardius, the red light, represents the blood shed on the cross. The rainbow promises God will not destroy the earth during the tribulation. Doesn't say anything about after, but during the tribulation. The throne appears emerald green and the color of life. Human words could not describe what John saw. So it was symbolic. He used symbols to describe it. He told us what he saw on the throne, what he saw around the throne, before it and what came after it. We'll see this upon the rapture too. Go to verse 4. Around the throne were 24 thrones, and on the thrones I saw 24 elders sitting, clothed in white robes, and they had crowns of gold in their hand. Back in the early days, there were 24 elders that represented the entire nation of Israel. These elders that we see in the Revelation will represent believers until the rapture, just like the 24 special priests represented Israel at one time. Will be dressed in white and wear the gold crowns we earn on earth. Remember, there are going to be two different judgments. One is the judgment of the throne. Everyone who goes to that judgment will be non-believers, and they're judged by God himself. They're doomed for the lake of fire. The other judgment is that of the Lamb. And Jesus will judge us based on our works that we do on earth, and we'll earn crowns for what we did while we were on the earth. We're all going to be in paradise, but some are going to have more crowns than others. Go to verse 5. And from the throne proceeded lightnings, thunderings, and voices. 7 lamps of fire were burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God. I have mentioned them before. I'm not going to go over those 7 spirits of God. But the thing about this one is, just last night we heard thunderings, and we heard rain, and we saw lightning. When you see these things in advance of a storm, you know the storm is coming. The tribulation is near. We see these things every day in our life, all throughout the world, throughout the United States. Here in Memphis, Tennessee, the crime rate is just sky high. There are thunderings, and we can hear them right now. It's a warning. Verse 6, before the throne there were a sea of glass like crystal, and in the midst of the throne and around the throne were 4 living creatures full of eyes in front and in back. Prophecy experts say the sea of glass represents humanity. And the sea actually does represent masses of people. It's biblical for humanity. Experts believe the sea of glass, number 1, is that. Number 2 is the water of the word. And number 3 is the water of baptism. This verse shows all was calm in front of God's throne. We have 4 creatures with eyes all over and wings. Tony mentioned these in the last class that we had. They're angelic like seraphim and cherubim. They can see everything in every direction. This is why they have eyes all over them. They can see everything. We must remember that Jesus was baptized with water. So we do it today, but it does not necessarily mean you are saved. So verse 6. Oh, that was verse 6. Verse 7, the first living creature was like a lion. The second living creature was like a calf. The third living creature had a face like a man, and the fourth living creature was like a flying eagle. These have caused a lot of confusion for a lot of people over the years. But if you remember, the symbol for Judah, which is the tribe that Jesus came from, the symbol for that tribe was the lion. Hence, we have the Lion of Judah, which is represented by one of the angelic creatures. He is the king. Mark described Jesus as a servant. Hence, we have an ox on one of the creatures. Jesus was human, so a human face on one of the creatures. And the last one is an eagle. Jesus is God. So, that verse right there is one of my favorite ones out of this whole book of Revelation, because it describes something I wondered about all my life. Now I'm going to combine verses 9, 10, and 11. Whenever the living creatures give glory and honor and thanks to him who sits on the throne, who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down upon him who sits on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever, cast their crowns before the throne, saying, You are worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they exist and were created. So, these creatures are there to worship. They worship Jesus. And when they do, the 24 elders fall down and worship with them. They proclaim his worthiness, and the Almighty Creator, we will too when in his presence. The same way we will fall down and worship. 4:11, this verse has been called the Song of Creation. It is the 24 elders proclaiming his worthiness. So that takes care of the rapture. That's what's happening in heaven during this time. Next week we'll talk about chapter 5, and these are the things that are happening on earth, preparing the way for the Antichrist's arrival. Appreciate y'all looking, and I hope that people in Memphis will come and join us. It's a lot more fun when it's interactive and we have people talking to one another. And this is Chuck signing off for now. Thank you.